Welcome to Midnight Murmurs, the channel where the darkest stories come to life. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the sun erupted and brought civilization to a grinding halt? What if it unleashed something dark and malevolent on the world? In our latest story, The End of the World as We Know It, a small-town sheriff and a group of survivors journey across a post-apocalyptic landscape to find safety and answers, facing all kinds of horrors along the way. Will they survive the ever-growing darkness that threatens to consume them? Watch our story and don't forget to like and subscribe to Midnight Murmurs for more chilling tales like this one. The End of the World as We Know It. Chapter 1: The Solar Flare. On that fateful day, the sky was a tranquil shade of blue, and only a few fluffy white clouds were passing by. Unaware of the impending doom that would soon alter the world forever, birds sang and flew carelessly. Then it took place. The intense heat and energy of the solar flare from the sun melted all of Earth's electronics and plunged the planet into darkness. As power plants, generators, and electrical devices malfunctioned and caught fire, the sound of explosions filled the air. When the world suddenly turned upside down, John, the small-town sheriff, was in the middle of his usual morning routine. He observed as the town fell into eerie silence as the streetlights faded out. When people realized that they were cut off from the rest of the world and had no way to communicate with anyone, their panic quickly grew. John's first instinct was to preserve order and safeguard the residents of his town. He rushed to the police station, gathered his deputies, and told them to keep the peace by patrolling the streets. However, the town soon fell into chaos as planes crashed, vehicles stopped moving, and people struggled to survive. John realized that this was not a typical disaster as he watched the events play out. It was only a matter of time before something sinister that had been unleashed on the world would surface. Thus, he pursued a choice that would change his life perpetually. He would rally with a gathering of survivors and travel across a dystopian scene to track down security and replies. John was determined to rise from the ashes and fight for his life after the solar flare brought the world to its knees. However, he had no idea what horrors he would encounter along the way. Chapter 2: The Awakening. John and his new friends made their way through the barren post-apocalyptic landscape with tired eyes looking for signs of hope on the horizon. The massive solar flare that scorched the earth and fried all electronics had destroyed the world as they knew it, leaving only chaos and destruction behind. As they strolled, they saw unusual and agitating events that recommended the flare had released something antiquated and malicious on the world. The survivors could hear strange whispers that seemed to come from the ground beneath their feet, and the air was thick with a palpable sense of dread. They heard a blood-curdling scream as they huddled around the campfire one night. They quickly grabbed their weapons and ran toward the sound, prepared to fight off any horror that might come their way. They saw a group of survivors being attacked by a monstrous creature with long limbs and sharp teeth as they got closer to the source of the scream. As it turned to face the newcomers, the creature's eyes shone with a nefarious light that chilled them to the bone and gave the impression that it was savoring the terror and agony of its prey. The monster was defeated valiantly by John and his companions, but it appeared to be immune to their weapons. A blinding light and an ear-splitting scream preceded the creature's disappearance into the night, just as all hope appeared to be lost. Realizing that they were not alone in this new world and that the flare had brought about something truly evil, the survivors were shaken and terrified. They were aware that they needed to carry on their journey and come up with a means of preventing this evil force from consuming the entire world. The survivors couldn't help but ponder what else awaited them as they regrouped around the campfire. Would they be able to survive in a world where the flare had brought forth ancient evils? Or would they also give in to the gloom and join the evil force that was threatening to destroy them all? Chapter 3: The Creatures. The first creature was observed by the group as they were traveling along a deserted highway. It had the body of a spider and the head of a goat, but it was about the size of a small car. It had 8 legs, bristly black hair on them, and eerie green light in its eyes. As the creature sped toward them, John and his companions froze in fear. Despite its monstrous appearance, it moved with fluid grace, and as it got closer, they could see that its jaws were filled with a viscous black fluid. The creature pounced without warning, sending the group flying in all directions. John was the first to recover, and as soon as he did, he pulled out his shotgun and fired 2 quick shots at the beast. The creature did not even flinch when the shots were fired. They could hear more creatures approaching from all directions as the others gathered. Some were the size of canines, with the heads of snakes or rodents. Others were larger, towering over the group with bodies that were twisted and out of shape and claws that were razor-sharp. The survivors retaliated energetically, yet the animals were tireless. With their claws tearing at flesh and their jaws snapping, they swarmed over the group. John felt his own fear rise with each passing moment as the stench of death and blood filled the air. The creatures retreated in terror as a bright light filled the sky just as everything appeared to be lost. The creatures were pushed back and left writhing in agony on the ground, as if the light had a will of its own. With cuts and bruises on their bodies and gasping for air, John and his companions stumbled away from the creatures. They were aware that they had just come face to face with the unimaginable horrors of the post-apocalyptic world as they regrouped and assessed their injuries. However, they were aware that there was still hope as they gazed up at the sky. They might be able to fight back against the darkness and save humanity if they could just figure out how to use the flare's power. Chapter 4: The Sacrifice. The bleak landscape that lay in front of John and his group as they stood on the edge of a precipice was breathtaking. They were aware that they had traveled too far to turn around now. They found the evil they had been looking for, and it was much more potent than they could have imagined. John began to feel a creeping fear as they gazed out at the barren landscape. He was aware of what they needed to do, but he refused to believe it. Offering themselves as sacrifices was the only way to put an end to the evil. They had examined it for a really long time, gauging the dangers and advantages of making such a penance. While they were aware that they probably would not survive, they were also aware that their actions would determine the world's fate. John observed the group's expressions of fear and uncertainty as he looked around. He was aware that they were all grappling with the consequences of this choice, but they also acknowledged that there was no other option. It seemed like they had been there for a long time, but it was only a few minutes. John exhaled deeply before gazing out at the horizon. He was aware of his obligation. He stepped forward and offered himself as the first sacrifice without saying a word. His gathering stuck to this same pattern individually until they were all remaining at the edge of the slope, prepared to surrender themselves to the insidiousness. They experienced a sense of calm as they jumped off the edge. They were prepared to face whatever came next because they were aware that they had accomplished what was required to save the world. The sacrifice was well done. They could see the evil vanish and the world slowly return to normal as they fell. They were aware that they had saved the world, but only after paying a terrible price. As they fell, John and his gathering felt a feeling of quiet and serenity. They were aware that they had given their lives for the greater good and that their names would live on forever. Together, they had reclaimed the world from the darkness. Chapter 5: The Journey. As the group set out on their journey, eager to put an end to the evil that had befallen their world, the morning sun cast a warm glow over them. John, his reliable assistant Mark, a former army medic named Sarah, a young couple named Tim and Lisa, and an elderly man named Frank made up the group. The only sounds they heard as they moved through the barren wasteland that used to be a bustling city were the occasional howl of a far-off creature and the crunch of gravel under their feet. The group persevered despite the lengthy and risky journey because they were determined to reach their destination. The group encountered a wide range of horrors as they moved deeper into the wilderness. They came face to face with a massive mutated bear, stumbled upon a nest of enormous spiders, and narrowly escaped a pack of hungry wolves. However, the group persevered by relying on one another, their courage, and their strength. The group began to lose their motivation as the days went on. But John was aware that they needed to continue. He told them in moving speeches that they were humanity's last hope and that they had to succeed no matter what. The group finally made it to their destination, despite what seemed like an interminable journey. It was a huge network of caves that went far down into the earth. They prepared for the final battle because they were aware that this was the location of the evil. The group encountered a wide range of horrors as they entered the night. They faced their deepest fears, triumphed over impossibilities, and fought unfathomable monsters. But they never gave up, no matter what. They finally made it to the center of the cave system, a massive chamber filled with evil and darkness. A massive figure with ghastly red eyes stood in the center of the chamber. This was the evil that had brought the world to its knees. John and his group were aware. Knowing that they would decide the fate of humanity, they prepared for the final battle. Then, determined to end the evil once and for all, they charged forward. Chapter 6: The Showdown. Finally, the group reached the spot where they believed the ancient evil was hiding. They could feel the evil spirit coming from the darkness as they got closer. John could detect the apprehension and uncertainty in his colleagues' brains, however he realized that they needed to proceed. It was too far for them to turn around now. They were humanity's last hope, and they wouldn't give up. With their weapons ready, the group entered the crumbling temple ruins. Their footsteps echoed throughout the corridors, and the stench of decay permeated the air. The darkness around them seemed to get thicker, almost suffocating, as they went deeper into the temple. John could hear the ancient evil's whispers, which promised suffering and pain. Unexpectedly, the gathering was gone after by a crowd of bizarre, wound animals. Despite their best efforts, John and his companions appeared to be outnumbered and outmatched. John recalled the ancient text's words just as they were about to be overwhelmed. He rallied his companions and reminded them of their mission, which was to offer their suffering and fear to the ancient evil as a sacrifice. The group fought their way through the horde of creatures with renewed strength and determination until they reached the temple's center. They discovered the ancient evil's source there, a sinister being who embodied fear and suffering. The group was aware of their obligations. They willingly gave up their fear and pain by offering themselves to the creature with trembling hands and heavy hearts. The twisted form of the creature pulsing with an alien energy gave the impression that it was getting stronger. Then, however, a miraculous event occurred. The creature's power began to vanish into nothingness as it began to shrink and fade away. By putting their lives on the line to put an end to the ancient evil once and for all, John and his companions had saved the world. John felt at peace and content as his consciousness waned. Humanity had a chance to start over because the darkness had been defeated. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. The world had changed everlastingly, and the survivors were passed on to get the pieces. Things that they would remember for the rest of their lives had occurred to them. They were haunted by the memories of the people they had lost and the sacrifices they had made as they worked to rebuild. John and his group had discovered a small group of survivors who had survived the solar flare. In the face of unimaginable horror, they were a resilient group of people who had joined forces to support one another. They warmly welcomed John and his group, and John expressed his gratitude for having discovered them. The days were long and hard. However, the local area cooperated to construct another life for themselves. They used their skills to build new homes and tools from what they could find in the old world's rubble. As they worked toward a common goal, there was an air of purpose and determination. However, despite their progress, a sense of unease persisted. The survivors had been through a lot, and what they had seen changed them all. They struggled to keep moving forward at times as the memories threatened to overwhelm them. John worked with others during the day, but at night he would sit alone and reflect on the day's events. He questioned whether they would ever be able to fully recover from their experiences. He wondered if the solar flare's unleashing of darkness would ever truly end. The community carried on with its work and reconstruction as the weeks turned into months. They continued to face challenges and dangers, but they did so together because they were aware that working together made them stronger. They also began to heal and advance, albeit slowly. The survivors had learned to adapt to and thrive in this new reality, even though the world would never be the same again. They had emerged from the other side of the darkness altered but still alive. They also knew that they would work together to overcome anything that awaited them in the future. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Midnight Murmurs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-tingling tales. And remember, the end of the world as we know it may be closer than we think. So stay alert, stay prepared, and stay tuned for more chilling stories on Midnight Murmurs.